and sort of being not disqualified. I mean, certainly he I'm sure got lots of votes, but it is hard to think of him seriously in that category just because he missed so much time. On the flip side, you look at a guy like Brock Lesnar, who, you know, what they wrestle all year, 4 matches.
4 matches.
He's a real contender. Despite wrestling a lot fewer matches than Daniel Bryan or almost anybody else who would be in the running. But in those few performances, maybe did more than anybody else.
He was certainly more dominant. He was, unbeaten. No pinfalls or submissions. I think he had the DQ against Cena, where Seth Rollins got involved there. But he could very well be the wrestler of the year. He's definitely a candidate for it, but he barely wrestled more than an hour combined.
Yeah.
Of that, and that's where we are in 2014 going on 2015, with the reliance on kind of part-time guys. Sting makes some appearances, Batista with the comeback, Triple H, others, Jericho with a annual comeback or so. Now we're in this era of the special attraction wrestlers, and this may be a year where your wrestler of the year could be somebody who's, not actively competing.
Yeah, kind of a sign of the times. And then I did want to spend some time talking about Woman of the Year and maybe relating it back to the Female 50, which you had a lot to do with this year, Dan. Paige came in number 1 in the Female 50. I was flipping through it earlier today. It's interesting, even compared to the PWI 500, how many indie workers are in that top mix, and how the most prominent female wrestlers, the divas. You've got a diva at number 1, obviously, but you've got some of the most prominent divas in WWE, not low ranked, but they're not in the top mix either. And I think that's again one place to differentiate women's wrestling from men's wrestling is that the best work, the highest quality, my sense isn't coming from WWE. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a fair assessment. You see, I think that in WWE, and we'll take last night's Raw, the other night's Raw, this week's Raw, for example, the women's match, it was Nikki Bella against Natalya. And they had about 2 minutes. It was just an absolutely forgettable match. All that really happened was Nikki got knocked off the apron into Tyson Kidd's arms. Tyson kind of held her for a second before putting her back in the ring, and Natalya got rolled up. And in WWE, they have really kind of conditioned the fans to look at women's matches as these are storyline fodder, and they move along storylines. They're not a match in and of itself. Yeah. Whereas the independents, and especially, I regularly go to the Shimmer shows out in Chicago. I like to kind of go up to NCW Femme Fatales in Montreal periodically. I have not had a chance to get down to Shine, but I'll probably be doing that in the near future. Although I do watch a lot of the stuff that they've done down there. You have these promotions that are, and not to miss WSU out there as well, but you have these promotions that are really featuring women athletically competing. There's storylines, there's brawlers, there's a wide, diverse mix of styles, and it's very pure. It's not, here's a 2-minute match that's designed to kind of get heat on somebody. It allows women to go out there and really kind of test their skills and put on great matches. And it's kind of like a lot of them are, there are some people who like, say, women's basketball, and they'll tell you that they like women's basketball because it's not like the NBA or things like that where it's dunk and foul, and it's a lot more of the technique and passing and smart gameplay and strategy. Women's wrestling can be that as well because you don't have necessarily the huge powerhouses. You don't have people who can do crazy, high spots and things like this. You have a lot of women who are physically right around the same skill set, strength, and they have to find more creative ways to tell the story of a match.
Yeah.
So it really makes it a lot more entertaining and a lot more competitive on the independent circuit than what you see in WWE. And that's reflected in the rankings of the Female 50.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum because when you look at men's indie wrestling and you look at even who's on top of WWE right now, the Dean Ambroses, the Seth Rollins, the Daniel Bryans, these are guys who are having great performances all over the country on the indies, but still aspire to come to WWE, in part for the payday and for the fame, but because the highest level of them practicing what they can do is a WrestleMania, where they can go and put on the match of their career, put on a 30-minute, tear the giant house down, tear the stadium down performance in what could be, a match of the year candidate, something that's really classic. So they've got something to aspire to, where these women who are having these great, amazing performances throughout the country and the indies, if they aspire to come to WWE, what they're looking forward to is basically having a 2-minute match. I mean, the days of them being able to have these great performances, these great matches, they pretty much end the day you come in WWE. And that's not so much a knock on WWE. It's just that they have such a different philosophy and formula for women's wrestling.
There's somebody, I had a conversation with a woman wrestler, and this is really kind of illuminating. What's really cool is I do attend a lot of these shows, so I get to know a lot of these people and the promoters and the referees real well. I was talking to one woman who was in the female 50, and we were talking about Paige getting on NXT. And this woman was saying, oh, it's I'm so happy for her. They're going to be using her on NXT and everything else. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. Like, why are you happy that she's on NXT? Or I'm sorry, not NXT, on Total Divas. Why are you happy that she's on Total Divas as opposed to, being a wrestler and being in title contention? And the line was, well, if you're on Total Divas, you make more money, you get more exposure, and you're a bigger star. And there's the perception in WWE that being a part of Total Divas, being on that cast, you get compensated better and you're treated better and you get more respect than necessarily being Divas champion. Which it kind of blows, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm just, pro wrestling. It's about being champion, being, the top and having the title. It's really not like that with the Divas division in WWE. It's more profitable to be an entertainer in sports entertainment rather than the sports part.
All that leads to the question, who is, or who should be the Woman of the Year in the PWI Year-End Awards. And because of all these reasons, my vote went to essentially a non-wrestler, and that was Stephanie McMahon, who I thought this year was more influential, more a player in wrestling than anybody else. I mean, she was a centerpiece of a lot of key storylines as part of the Authority. The Bellas feud throughout the summer. I mean, I thought it was one of the highlights of WWE storyline-wise. The payoff was horrible with the Bellas splitting up, but there was some real quality entertainment between Stephanie and Brie Bella through the summer. And again, when the others are women like AJ or Paige, who had really good years for a diva, but I don't know that I could tell you one 3-star match that either of them had. I'd put Charlotte in the running. I thought Charlotte had some great performances, maybe in part because she's not on the main roster. She's able to have those longer form matches on NXT. But again, I don't think any female wrestler eclipsed what Stephanie McMahon did this year.
Yeah, for me, we went with Paige as number one in the female 50. And again, that's looking at active women wrestlers, which though Stephanie did a match, she's not really
right. She wouldn't be eligible for that.
Right. Paige had the best year, I thought, during the grading period. But again, the grading period isn't it's a calendar year, but it doesn't begin January to December. It's the previous 12 months, whereas the year-end awards are the calendar year. I thought from January to December, the top women's wrestler, my vote went to AJ Lee. Yeah. I thought Paige did really well during her period, but AJ ended up kind of coming on top of that feud and was consistent throughout the year. I think she had some really good matches against Paige primarily. 3-star, whatever you want to call them, but some very. I think she helped elevate the Divas title during that time and made it more interesting than it's been over the past few years. So I think she's great because both of them, Paige and AJ, they can be the Divas. They can kind of fit in with the Divas crowd, but they can also work. They can go, 8-10 minutes and have a really good match, or longer if they're ever given that amount of time, and really kind of make it work. So they're kind of the real deal, and my vote went to AJ.
It'll be interesting to see what 2015 has in store for AJ. She's married to CM Punk. CM Punk, I don't know that blood gets much worse than it is between WWE and CM Punk right now. And, it's something that he's not addressing much, but to me, that's the pink elephant in the room, right? That you've got CM Punk, who is right now as vocal a critic of WWE as anyone, and you have his wife as one of the top featured stars, and you think something's got to give, you got to think that Punk shares some of his thoughts, his philosophy on everything that's wrong in WWE and how they mistreat people. These are his words, with his wife. And, that's odd. I mean, he has essentially said he hates the place. He thinks it's a nightmare there. They mistreat their workers. And his wife works there. And it just seems like, again, something's got to give.
Yeah, it does. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, who knows whether or not AJ shares those same feelings. And, I know that she's one of those divas, and it comes out in her work. She wanted to be a wrestler from a very young age.
So did Punk.
What's that?
So did Punk, and, obviously that changed for him.
Yeah, that's true. But it's supposed to be a lot of the other women. A lot of the women just kind of got into wrestling through other means. She wanted to do this since she was a kid and just kind of worked towards it. So she's still – and she hasn't had the, 10, 12, 14 years on the independent scene that Punk had before getting there. Plus, what was it, 6-7 years in WWE altogether.
Right.
She's only been at it for about 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years total. So I don't know if the bloom has gone off the rose quite yet for age. Maybe it has with everything with CM, but she's definitely in a tough space, politically, I guess.
Yeah, that's just it, and that was the same term I was going to use, is the bloom off the rose, because on one hand, as you said, you've got the woman who dreamed about doing this her whole life and is there and is kind of achieved what she wants to achieve in terms of being at the pinnacle of women's wrestling in WWE, and yet she's married to somebody who is, again, as big a detractor, as big a critic of WWE as anyone, and so you got to think that she's torn between the two, and we'll see. What else? Nothing I wanted to cover as far as the year-end issue is our year-end memories. Every year, Stu asks some of the writers to weigh in on what they took away from the year. What was their biggest memory? There was no shortage of big stories this year. I mean, really, when you go everything that happened in 2014, from the network to the TV deal to the streak ending to Daniel Bryan's year to Brock Lesnar's year to everything with CM Punk, TNA losing their TV deal, everything happened to them. It was just filled with huge stories this year. My takeaway, again, when I think about what got me into wrestling and even what got me into Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and I've got it framed in my basement, it was that cover photo of the Ultimate Warrior winning the championship at WrestleMania 6. My favorite PWI cover. It had a gold border and that just iconic photo of the Warrior with both belts that I got him to sign some years ago. And again, he is a guy who is very polarizing, and some people were very happy to see him go into the Hall of Fame, and some people thought he had no business in the Hall of Fame, including a lot of people who work for WWE. But those few days from his Hall of Fame induction, obviously to his passing just a few days later, to me was the biggest story of the year. Somewhat personally, again, in terms of what he meant to me, and in getting me into this business. Still my favorite performer ever. And it's not just that he died or just that he was inducted in the Hall of Fame, but it just all came together as this real kind of epic story over a few days. I mean, you almost couldn't write it. And, kudos to WWE for that documentary that they put together that was just on again the other day. And it really tells the story of a guy who was out of the company and out of good favor with WWE for whatever it was, 16, 17 years.
Yeah.
And then came back and seemed to make peace, not just with WWE, but with the fans, with himself, kind of appreciating his part in history. And that was kind of the image of the Ultimate Warrior at the Hall of Fame that Saturday night, was somebody who finally came to peace with his role in history, his place in history. And then, I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, you think about that promo that he cut Monday night, which was, almost his epitaph.
Yeah.
Talking about...
it still gives you chills. It was just every man's legacy and the day his heart beats its final beat.
Incredible.
And,
So that was my takeaway, was, the story of the Ultimate Warrior and the Ultimate Warrior's passing in 2014. How about you?
Mine was, and that was absolutely an unforgettable bit, that entire speech and everything. That was definitely an incredible moment from the year, especially in light of his passing so closely afterwards. For me, my memory of the year was the streak ending.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people will look at it that way. And I kind of thought that, I was one of the last guys to kind of select my memory. I thought the streak would be the first thing taken. And it wasn't, which is kind of interesting because there were so many other memorable things that people selected to write about. For me, the streak was just I was never a huge fan of the streak to begin with. And not that I was against it, but okay, he's undefeated. That's great. It didn't sell me on WrestleMania one way or the other. I never really put much stock in the streak, I guess, whether it would end. But that match was, it just felt different. And I remember watching it and seeing how Undertaker seemed off, and it says, the speculation later that he had a concussion early on and things like that, but it just seemed off. It seemed that he was slower, and it just felt before the finish happened that we're seeing something different here. And what really struck me was on the F5 by Brock Lesnar, I just kind of knew that's the pin. And, being that, because I had to write the story for PWI, I do the show, The Real Winners and Losers, and I keep the match time and everything. And I time out all the matches and compare them to, the reported official time. So I'm writing down the pinfall in the time as the referee's hitting the 3 count. What I remember is I was watching it with a group of people. I was actually watching in a sports bar with a lot of independent wrestlers, actually. What I remember most is the silence. I looked up and, I almost thought that maybe they lost the feed of the pay-per-view or something, and everybody was just stunned. I was in a room full of people watching the show, and nobody knew how to react for a few seconds. And, it became the thing of memes and everything else, the one fan with the incredulous eyes and everything. But I remember writing about this, and JBL actually brought it up in commentary at one point too. I'd always heard that when Bruno Sammartino lost the WWF World title to Ivan Koloff, that the initial reaction was just stunned silence, that nobody could believe it happened. But I never experienced that until that moment.
Follow us on Facebook and on Twitter @officialPWI. Please drop us a line with your feedback. PWI Podcast @outlook.com. And stay tuned for my first part of my interview with Craig Peters. I imagine it's going to take several installments to get all the interview out there, but you definitely want to check this out. Dan, thank you so much. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to all the listeners. And we will be back next week.
Thank you so much, Greg, for joining us, agreeing to do this. I've been a fan, obviously, for a long time, as I imagine a lot of readers have, listeners, and it's not too often you get a chance to talk to a guy who's really a legend in wrestling journalism. So, Craig, what are you up to these days?
So, first of all, Al, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I hope everybody listening to this tells all their friends and fellow fans about the PWI podcast, because it's been a long time coming, and I'm thrilled that it's here to be a little part of it. So, what am I doing these days? I'm actually an editorial designer.